Hey everyone, today we're ranking the weapons in Apex Legends Season 12. No BS, let's just get right to it. Kicking us off, we have the C-tier weapons, as the weaponry in Apex is all in a pretty decent spot right now, which also means the majority of guns are usable, and also means that we don't have any D-tier guns, which I would deem to be bad. First is going to be the P2020, and if you aren't aware, my list is primarily catered towards the Battle Royale and just general play, so no competitive tournaments, and more or less just casual rank. The P2020 is in such a weird spot right now, as the reintroduction of hammer points was a welcomed return, but that being said, hammer points were nerfed, and sadly, it's gonna keep this weapon a little bit lower for me. The P2020 is a solid C tier weapon without those hammer points and a solid B tier with them, making it actually a viable secondary, but you really have to get those hammer point rounds. A quick few taps after the swap of your main weapon, you can down someone in health pretty quickly. With that being said, I'll still pretty much swap the P20 for anything else on the ground. In addition to the P2020, we also have the Mozambique at a solid C plus tier, and this thing is in just as weird of a spot as the P2020. Traditionally, I have rated the Mozambique above the P20 just because it has a higher one-tap potential after you're swapping off your primary weapon, but the Mozam with hammer points can still do a generous 60 hit to health, which is nice, but again, hammer points were nerfed from its previous form, where it used to actually be able to one-tap anyone in health. I give this weapon the same treatment as the P20, where if you do have hammer points, I think it's more like a solid B tier weapon, where this thing is actually probably better than the EVA 8, even if you have hammer points, seeing as you can do a full body hit of 45 or 60 at more like 30 meters, where the EVA can barely do this at 10. Our final C tier weapon at C+ is going to be the RE45. If you're noticing a trend here, it's because there is one, and the RE45 is no exception to my hammer point rule. The RE45 has always been a sleeper weapon in my opinion, with incredible handling speed, but just an average magazine size and total damage per mag, and even just an average time to kill. Again, hammer points is a nice boost to the health damage, and they actually make it a very nice weapon to swap to after getting someone weak, as that boost in damage and handling speed are just incredible for a swap to secondary. With hammer points, I give it a nice B+ tier rating, and it's nice to have another secondary option than just running a shotgun every single game. So if you haven't used the RE45 this season, I think it's definitely worth a pickup, but again, you really got to get the hammer point rounds. Starting off the good guns at B tier, this is going to be the borderline C weapon for me, and this is the Bocek at B-. The Bocek has moments of brilliance, don't get me wrong, but it's hard for me to recommend the Bocek over any of the other guns in its category. The Bocek does have an element of stealth, which is nice, and the addition of the auto shatter cap activation is cool, but arrows can be brutal to find, as rarely do players run this weapon, which means you could run low on ammo mid-game and be forced to swap or just be down a weapon. Unlike the 30-30 and the triple take, the Bocek also really requires you to get a full draw for the damage to be anything but mediocre, which is truly unfortunate and actually a little bit puzzling as to why the damage is so low if you aren't giving it a full charge compared to those other weapons. The Bocek isn't terrible, and it may even be a little underrated for my list, but I think there's just a lot better options if you are looking for a mid-range beamer, or if you are just looking to poke people from range. The second B- weapon is the Sentinel Sniper Rifle. This will be slightly controversial, as some people live and die by the Sentinel, but I have never really been too big on it. I will get to the longbow later, but with that gun being only craftable now, the Sentinel kind of has more shine on it this season. My big problem is that the damage for the Sentinel over the longbow is fairly minimal if you are not charging it up, and any weapon that relies on your vitally important shield cells is just disappointing in my eyes. I will say, if you get a gold armor and you get that Sentinel, then this is more like an upper B tier weapon for me, but without it, it's just an okay to decent weapon. I do really enjoy the mini Kraber type feel with the Sentinel, and if you want a bolt action sniper, there's really no better pick than this thing. But for the majority of general play in Apex, it just isn't really that competitive as a weapon. The Sentinel also lacks a lot of close range viability that something like the longbow, triple take, maybe even the 30-30, maybe even the Bocek can bring to the table. The Sentinel is a blast to use, don't get me wrong, and getting those big hits in will be fun. If you're sniper at heart, then this will be a good pick for you, but if you want something a little bit more meta, I think you can look past this. At a solid B tier, we are going to have the charged rifle. There may be no better weapon in all of Apex Legends when it comes to purely farming damage and leveling those Evo shields. If you are trying to slow down teams or you're playing ranked, you might want to consider the charge for this reason alone, as even a partial hit in there can be a pretty big deal. The hit scan, of course, makes it easy to do this, and the continual partial or even a big hit here and there will just slow players down. The big drawback for the charge rifle for me has always been the pure amount of ammo you are going to need to carry. It's also really not too good at close-up, like some of the other weapons that we could compare it to when it does come to damage farming. The charge rifle is a great weapon, probably slept on a little bit, and I think you should definitely consider giving it a try if you are looking for a ranked pick or if you're just trying to farm damage. The next straight B tier weapon is the L-Star. Right off the bat, the L-Star is nowhere near as good as it was a couple seasons ago, but it still has some viability, and while I don't think it's great, it's definitely not bad either. The no reload mechanic is pretty interesting, and if you do get this down, you can continually poke enemies and even down some players pretty quickly. Energy ammo weapons as a whole are a little bit odd right now with the Volt being gone, so finding ammo for this mid-game or even late game could definitely be tough. My biggest problem for the L-Star is it just feels a little underwhelming to use, and I'd much rather use weapons that I consider to be in the same class in terms of range, which would be that Flatline, R301, even the Hemlock. The L-Star ain't bad, it's just not what it was. It's still a solid gun. Pick it up if you want a little bit of a different feel. The EVA 8 is our final straight B tier weapon, another gun that is in a really odd spot, and I'm not gonna lie, if this was my slightly more personal, just my own feelings list, I would be ranking this thing in C tier, but I am trying to think a little bit more objectively in terms of its performance. It has a good mag size, and if you are really close up and connecting shots, you can dish out a wild amount of damage very fast. But that being said, the range is abysmal compared to the other 3 shotguns on this list, and I actually think the Hammer Point Mozambique would be much better of a secondary option, seeing as you can burn players down from really far away with that thing. There may be no more disappointing thing than swapping to try to finish an enemy, and you are just hitting a stream of 6s on them, and you eventually end up dead. The EVA 8 isn't bad, and if you are playing very aggressively with something like an R99, you probably will do pretty well with it, but I just really think that all the other shotgun options are better, and especially if you can't get hammer points on the Mozambique. The next 2 weapons at B+ are a pair of energy guns, the Devotion and the Havoc. Both of these guns have some of the fastest time to kill in Apex Legends, but it's really only if you can get them kitted out with some attachments, and specifically that turbocharger. I am rating the guns without the turbo, but if you do get the turbos, I truly think both of these guns are some of the more slept on weapons in Apex, and they can be considered A+ tier weapons if you do have that turbocharger. The Havoc has a really incredible base mag size, and so does the Devotion, meaning you can down multiple enemies with a single mag or even an entire squad with that Devotion. Both of these guns do take a little bit more skill to use in my opinion than say like the Spitfire or the R301, but don't let that discourage you. I highly recommend you try them out, and for some reason, the Havoc is everywhere right now on the ground. It's probably because the Volt is gone, so I think you absolutely should learn the Havoc and absolutely consider picking up the Devotion from time to time. The final pair of B+ weapons is going to be 2 that are fairly similar in terms of performance, and this is the longbow and the triple take. I've never had a harder time placing the longbow than I have in Season 12. On one hand, it's the same as it was last season, but the longbow is kind of like a care package weapon for me, and I typically don't even rate them because the chances of getting one every game is fairly low compared to any other gun that you can't just pick up. But that being said, the care package guns are intentionally a lot better than most of the other weapons. The longbow is unlike the flatline though, which has a ton of viability in the meta, whereas the longbow is a little less so than meta, and I don't foresee many people crafting this gun this season. It's a double-edged sword though, as you can plan your game around with the point of making one, but if you don't play this way, you'll just never get a longbow ever. The longbow is still a stellar pick, and it has a lot of viability from that long-range 4 to 8 times sniper tapping to even a 2 times bruiser close-range picking. I just truly wish that it was a little bit more readily available, but it doesn't appear this is going to be the case at all for Season 12. As for that triple take, it's one of the few weapons that did see a nerf this season, and I think the damage nerf is pretty sizable to be honest, but the triple take is still a breeze to use, and it's very similar to the charge rifle in my opinion, where it's mega easy to get partial hits in there, and I think the triple take is one of the better weapons if you do want to be a little bit of the annoying player, if you are trying to play slower ranked games, as it has a lot of potential to be really great. Truthfully, the triple take excels at a ton of ranges as well, and it can even be used as a last resort shotgun, and it's probably even better than the EVA 8 like this. The triple take is something you can't pick up to farm damage, and it really just works in all the game modes in Apex, and I think you should be using it from time to time. Before we move on, I just want to give a huge thank you to my partner for 2022, Glitch Energy. If you are looking to level up your game a notch and or just want something tasty to drink, pick up a Glitch Energy, the leader in gamer wellness. Glitch does have tons of delicious products that will give you increased focus after those long days when you are still looking to bring your A game. Head over to Glitch Energy and grab some. One I love is Granny Grenades, and it does show as I have been having one daily as a part of my gaming routine. Use code TimProVision for 25% off your order, and with that out of the way, back to the weapon ranking. We are now moving into the A tier weapons, which I think are all really amazing guns that you should be able to excel with in any form of Apex Legends. The first weapon, and if you told me a year ago or even a season ago it would make A tier, I think I would have gone crazy, but I still can't believe it as I'm saying it. It is the 30-30 repeater at A-. For the first time ever, the 30-30 I truly believe is one of, if not the best poking weapon in Apex Legends, and the combination of the buff to the shatter caps makes this thing a well-rounded rifle. Damage of the 30-30 is barely under what the Bocek can do, but it does way more damage even if you aren't fully charging your shots. Not to mention, the 30-30 uses heavy ammo, which is just way more readily available. I don't think the 30-30 is as easy to use as the triple take though, so it will require a little bit more skill to use it successfully, but it shouldn't really be too big of a deal in my opinion. It's also nice that you can either choose to prioritize long range with the dual shell hop up, or if you want to, the 30-30 can do a little bit of everything and you can take shatter caps. It's so nice the 30-30 is viable now for a poking weapon, but wow, did it take a long time for it to get to where it is today. At a straight A tier, we now have two SMGs, and this is both the Alternator and the Prowler. Starting with the Prowler, not a ton to say about this thing. It's been really insane for a while now, but my biggest gripe with the Prowler is its base mag size of 20. While 20 is good, and it's pretty comparable to the other weapons, if you miss a single burst, you're going to be in a pretty rough spot. While we are on the topic of it being burst, it's kind of a love-hate relationship for many people, as some seem to love it, and others seem to despise it. I'm somewhat in the middle when it does come to the Prowler specifically, but I think any controller user will greatly benefit from the Prowler, while any non-controller user may want to look at something else like the Alternator or the R99. It is rare for me to prioritize inputs when it comes to weapons, and there's not many guns where it does matter, but the Prowler is going to be one of them. It's really an insane SMG, and if you can get that gold Prowler or even a purple mag, and if you are hitting your shots, you are just going to melt. Second to the Prowler is the newly floor-looted Alternator. The Alternator in the care package was arguably one of the best guns in the game, but even back on the floor, this thing is just a breeze to use. If you're a newer or less skilled player, the Alternator should be the gun you are looking to use. It doesn't have the best time to kill, but the combination of the slower fire rate means you can easily control this thing with little to no recoil control needed. Also, total damage you can do from the mag is really high, as the base magazine size is generous for the amount of damage per bullet that it does do. The Alternator actually might be a little bit higher on my list as the season progresses, and if there's anything that you are probably sleeping on, it's gonna be this little light SMG. Give it a try. I would even recommend you rock it 2 times on it and use it like a hybrid close to mid-range weapon. The Alternator in a lot of ways kind of replaces the Volt in terms of like that longer range SMG. It just does not have the same time to kill as the Volt does, but I still think it's a really good pick. Next is going to be the Hemlock. The Hemlock has been getting a serious amount of attention over the past couple weeks, and it's for a good reason. For starters, the flatline is no longer on the floor, which more or less gives the Hemlock an extreme premium as a heavy assault rifle. In some senses, though, it's pretty refreshing, as the Hemlock might be one of the more versatile weapons in the game. It's okay at close range, maybe a little weak, but the mid-range bursting is superb, and even the long-range 3 times tap firing can be incredible. The Hemlock is a fairly refreshing experience again, and in terms of the meta, I think it's absolutely worthy of a pickup. Also, don't sleep on the boosted loader. 36 rounds in an assault rifle is pretty nuts. We now have a handful of guns at A+ that are borderline top tier or best in the game. The first is going to be that sweaty, toxic Rampage LMG. The Rampage actually doesn't have a competitive time to kill unless it is charged up, but wow, is this thing just absurdly easy to use. The combination of charging it up with the thermite to get rapid kills at enemies in close range, to even the capability of massively long-range tap firing to farm damage, really just makes this thing kind of an all-rounder that anyone should be able to use. I kind of think it's a no-skill required weapon, and if you are struggling, and as much as I really hate to recommend it, you might want to pick it up. Just be warned that close-range fights are what really matters in Apex, and there's a lot better options than this gun for that. I also don't love that you kind of need to stack thermites for it to really be effective at close range, but it's up to you and how you want to play the game, as there's really no right or wrong way to play, as long as you're having a good time. Next, we have a pair of shotguns at A+, and this is both the Mastiff and the Peacekeeper. These guns for me are virtually identical in terms of viability in the meta, and it really comes down to the legend you are playing and the playstyle you have. You can either prioritize chipping away with the Mastiff or get bigger hits with the Peacekeeper. If I did have to pick one that is better, I think it's going to be the Peacekeeper, as I think being able to swap to your secondary shotgun and just hit a little bit more damage per hit is going to be the move. But if you want more forgiveness, or if you're playing a legend like Gibraltar, then the Mastiff will be insane for you. I debated debated putting both of these shotguns in S tier, but I think secondary playstyles can depend on the person, and while I do think a shotgun is a must grab for higher tier ranked or aggressive pub playing, it isn't necessarily a requirement as much as it was a year ago. If you want some inventory management help, or if you just want to be able to drop in with a shotgun, give either of these a look at as your premier shotty experience for Season 12. The Wingman is on deck at A+, and I truly think it's one of the more nostalgic weapons in Apex that provides a very satisfying feel for the user. The only reason why I do not put the Wingman in S tier is that the skill required to use this thing with a ton of effectiveness is gonna really be hard to reach by the majority of players, but a base round 6 mag that is capable of one-magging anyone in the game is pretty clutch, not to mention it can be used at both the very, very close range to maybe even the closer side of mid-range, and even, long range if you do get lucky here and there. There really is not a whole lot to say when it comes to this little pistol, and if you want truly to get better at the game and increase your skill, I probably would use the Wingman, as it requires you to be very accurate or you will be in trouble. Because of this, I often find that I push myself to be a little bit more accurate with my shot, and I just really love the Wingman. It's always a good time, and it's very satisfying to use. I just think it requires a little bit too much skill to be in S tier. This brings us to the final A+ weapon of the Flatline. I would have put this thing in S tier, but there's a couple reasons why I did not do this season. Similar to the Longbow, it's only craftable, which means getting it from time to time could be difficult unless you are specifically playing with the thought process of getting a flatline from a crafter. In addition to this, it did have a 1 damage nerf, and I actually find this to be fairly negligible. Regardless though, the combination of these two things does make it fall just a third of a rank in my eyes, but even though I don't have it in S tier, there's really no comparing it to many of the other guns in the game. The only thing I think that could give it a run for its money in terms of it being usable at all ranges is going to be that R301, but even that doesn't hit as hard as the flatline does when it does come to that close range. In addition to the close range hip firing, it's great at mid-range beaming and even long-range tap firing, and I do think it can be one of the best guns to run if you are looking for an all-arounder. Unlike the R301, which more or less has very little to no recoil, the flatline is also very satisfying to use, and when you do get that 1 mag at like mid-range, it's just so satisfying. I love the flatline. I think anyone can have success with it. If you are playing with the crafting stations in mind this season, it's going to be a really great pickup for you, and you're going to be able to get it pretty much every game. If you are enjoying this video, do me a huge favor, slam that like button. I would greatly appreciate the support, as a video like this honestly takes a ton of time to make. And also, consider subscribing to the channel. This way you'll be notified for all my future tier list guides and lots more that we have around here. There are now 3 guns in S tier, and the first is going to be the tried and true R99 at an S-. The R99 is one of those guns in the game that if you are playing very aggressively in, say, pub games, you will have a really nice time getting those 1 mags on players. I have it at the S- specifically for a couple reasons though. One being that I think another gun is a little bit better, but I also think that the R99 won't work too well in the slower or maybe the little bit upper tier ranked games, just because it does lack some sort of range that you would need in these modes. But if you are a pub smashing warrior, I do think the R9 is a really great choice, and one that I really love pairing up with the Wingman to this day to give me that OG Apex Legends feel. At a straight up S tier, we now have the previously alluded to car SMG. I do think some people are either R99 warriors and then others are going to be team car, but I have the car a 3rd tier higher than the R99 for one main reason and a couple secondary reasons. This is just the fact that the car has a higher damage per bullet, meaning you're more likely going to be able to 1-mag players right off the drop or off the pickup. I also, for some strange reason, feel like the car is a little bit easier to use than the R9, but I do think it's all really just personal preference. The car also has its versatile nature where you can roll either ammo types to help keep your ammo separated from your squads, and because it takes either light or even heavy mags, you'll be able to get it kitted up a little bit faster, which I think is a very nice and convenient factor that you should consider. The car is a demon though. If you haven't been using it, you really should give it a try, as it's an incredible SMG with a really great time to kill, and the convenience again of it is just so easy and so forgiving. This brings us to the final S tier weapon of the R301 at S+. The R301 once again retains the top spot in Apex Legends, and more than ever is it going to be your go-to rifle, seeing as that flatline was both nerfed and put in the crafter. I'm not sure what else I can say about the R301 at this point. Time and time again, it's the #1 recommended weapon for players for me, as it has low recoil, its magazine size is great, and it has one of the most common types of ammo this season, light ammo. The R301 is that typical bread and butter assault rifle that any new player can use to get the feel for the game, and even an experienced player playing in the top tier ranked or an ALGS match, they are going to be able to perform very well with this weapon. It's unfortunate that there's really no competition for the top spot with the flatline being gone, but at least there's a ton of other great weapons in Apex to give a run for its money, like the Hemlock, Rampage, maybe even the Alternator, to name a few. We aren't quite done yet, though. Let's briefly talk about all the care package weapons, just in case you are wondering. They are all S tier in my eyes, but for starters, that G7 is probably the more underwhelming care package gun, but even then, it's incredible poking, 2 farm shields, and just apply pressure. If it does lack anything, it might be the overall amount of reserve ammo, oddly enough. From this, we got the Spitfire. There's no better gun in all of Apex when it does come to wiping entire squads with a single mag, and this thing rightfully is deserving of a care package spot. Then we have the Kraber. It's the only weapon that can, one-tap anyone from pretty much anywhere at any time. And finally, the newly introduced care package Volt is something that you absolutely need to try and find. It's a pretty common pickup in the care package, and wow, is this thing just a demon. It was already insane on the ground, but giving it a couple buffs and putting it in the care package really just made it dumb broke when it comes to its effectiveness. In some ways, I will say that I missed the Volt being on the ground, as I do think the Volt was one of those guns that gave the R301 a run for its money in terms of the close to mid-range meta, but it will be curious to see if the alternator can try and fill this role as well. Regardless of what weapons are on top, though, there's so many great options to choose from right now, which makes Apex a pretty refreshing game to play. If you ever want to chat with myself in the community or forego playing with randoms, be sure to hop into our Discord, hit that like button. Until next time, happy gaming, legends.